A lot of people are changing careers and becoming coaches. As mental health becomes a major problem as we move forward, there have to be a place where they learn. And today's show, we're going to be speaking to someone that teaches people how to become a coach and how to help people transform their own lives. Hi, this is Joey Buzzardville, and welcome to the Secret Men's Business Podcast. On today's show, we're going to be speaking to Justin O'Hare, who is the owner of a business that trains people to become coaches, but more importantly, he's also on television. Justin, how are you?
I'm good, Joey. How are you?
I'm good. So thank you so much for talking to us. As I was saying to you before we started, I really do get inspired by people and want to interview them. So hopefully your story can inspire others. And I found your story really inspiring with the way that you sort of traveled through your life and made things work for you. So before we start, do you want to maybe just share with the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So growing up as a young kid, probably started as a very young kid. My mum at the age of 12 and my dad had, I was 12, mum and dad started smoking a bit of weed, and that sort of led from one thing to another. Became drug abuse in our household pretty soon, and mum ended up schizophrenic, and mum had a lot of childhood trauma as well. And there's a lot of evidence around that says that, drug abuse and substance abuse with unresolved negative trauma in our lives leads to mental health issues. So for me, I guess from a very young age, I was exposed to psychosis and to mum being in and out of mental hospitals. My dad got extremely angry because I think that in his life he didn't know how to work with mum back then. I mean, it's 20 something years ago now. So that nobody really talked about mental health back then. It was sort of like, oh, those people are a bit crazy. Let's not talk about them. So it was a very much a if you had a friend that had mental health problems, we didn't talk about it. So
Yeah. So did you feel that you had to keep everything on the lowdown? Did you?
yeah, I mean, we certainly did never talk about it at school. I think one of the girls at school found out when I was at school, and and again, like just kid stuff. Year nines. If you talk to any high school teachers, I tell you, year nine's the hardest year to teach because of hormonal changes and lots of life changes. But for me, I was in year nine, and one of the girls had found out about mum being unwell, and that got used against me at school, which has really hurt. So yeah, it was definitely something that we didn't talk about. Not even with people that were close to us knew, but friends and family. But I think it was one of those things that just didn't get talked about. So when you don't talk about it, people don't know to offer support. And I think 25 years ago, that there certainly wasn't the support networks that there are now. And I still think we've got a long way to go, to be honest.
Yeah. And so with that experience, how did you then get across the part of you that wanted to become a teacher of coaching or become a coach? Like what was was it your mum, or was there other things that factored in that you said that's the path I want to take?
Yeah, I think mum was a big driving force because I'm very close with my mum even now. Dad, unfortunately, I was very close with dad as well, even through all of that stuff. So I was the eldest. Dad took a lot of his anger, I guess, out on not on me. It's probably not the right word, but he certainly was very angry, and a lot of that was directed toward me. So yeah, I think that probably that was the first thing is how do I help the people that I love the most? And I searched for years. I mean, I've got a real passion for helping people, and I hate to see people suffer. And I think that I was looking for tools, I was looking for techniques, I was looking for something that would be able to help them. And in that time, Dad unfortunately passed away, and mum's still going very well from a mental health point of view. But a lot of that was largely due to the support network that me, my brother, and sister were able to give her over a long period of time. But I was still searching. I mean, mum was still, lots of medication, and for anyone who's been on medication will tell you quite often that it's more of a numbing thing. So you don't have the highs, you don't have the lows, you don't have really sort of anything. So
Mm,
for me, I was really passionate about helping mum, and that sort of drove me to explore different things and look at different therapies because what she'd had didn't work. And I went through lots of different jobs. I started out as a mechanic, as an apprentice mechanic, went into a service manager role as a manager, and then into mining. And I was always sort of that person. Didn't matter where I worked, I was running around trying to fix
yeah.
everybody.
I was going to say that, like, you were looking for tools to help everyone you love. And I'm
Yeah,
thinking, okay, that's a therapist. So you're
yeah,
sort of like we're doing it at such a young age. And do you mind if I just talk about your mum a little bit? Like when you
sure.
said 20 years ago, there was no mention of mental health, and she's still with us now. So what have you noticed has changed with your mum and the way that people treat you versus to 20 years ago? What's changed?
Yeah, look, we probably the better way to answer that question is I actually did a training with a health department maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, And we were training them in life coaching because, again, they're sort of going, look, we want as many tools as we can. We're acknowledging that what we're doing right now is, we can do it better. And I think every industry is the same. You can always do something better. So I think in comparison to talking to people that are mental health consumers now, I think that there's still a really big gap. So from where mum was at to what's changed in the health service now is, to be honest, mate, I mean, and I certainly don't want to bag out anyone in the health service because I think they'll do the very best that they can with what they've got. But I think that the biggest changes that I've noticed is the languaging. So they, people are not patients anymore. They're consumers, and they're trying to improve the system. I think that's what they're trying to do. But ultimately, there's still that underlying. I think what we do in the mental health service still, and where we get it so wrong sometimes, is there's certainly people that are in acute mental health patients that need to be inpatients, but I think that we don't do enough work on what is the actual cause of this, and how do we actually solve that in a person's mindset, because there's people out there that have been through schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, bipolar, you name it, and they've been able to manage and come out the other side. And what we don't do enough of in the mental health service is go and get those people and say, what did you do, what worked? We spend too much time focused on the people who are unwell and trying to figure out what's wrong with them. So in a lot of the coaching stuff that we do, it's more about finding someone who's well or who's recovered from something, and then how do we get that thinking into the other person's mind?
Yeah, and also I think all of that involves money, and so I think money is a part of it. Like when you're in the public sector, you can see there's waiting lists and people like don't get the right treatment, and so they sort of sometimes slip through the cracks. Staying with that same topic, what about how rather than looking at professionals, but what about people in general? Like, do you feel that people have changed their opinion on, say, someone like your mum? Like, has the general public become more open because there's been more advertising or more talking about it?
Yeah, I think that there's certainly a lot more people out there that want to help now than what there probably was, but I still think that most people don't know what to do. So we're presented with someone in our family who's got a mental health problem, and we don't know what to do with that person. So we just put them through the mental health system, which is again overloaded at the moment, and for the foreseeable future will be. So we're putting them into a system that's, there's long waiting lists. There's 3-4 months sometimes before they get to see a specialist. And so yes, I think that it's changed, and the mental health is not as much of a dirty word anymore. But again, still you can see people walking down the street who, I just was in Perth for a week last week for a training, and walking down the street, the people that are clearly mentally unwell, there's still that unconscious bias of the general population toward people like that, and that there's still a big portion of people who kind of have this opinion, well, they're homeless because they want to be homeless, or they're homeless because they don't bother going out and getting a job. And again, I think sometimes that's true, but mental illness, I think, is still really, really completely not. We're not educated on what it is, how to recognize it, but more importantly, what to do about it.
So how? I mean, and this is a big question, and I think it's good that we're talking like this. And I've spoken to a lot of people in this profession, and they all say the same sort of thing. But what's your view on how we can start changing it? Like, how do we do that? Like, is it a government thing, or is it something smaller? Like, how do we start changing those opinions and those thoughts?
Yeah, really great question. And so I was asked this same question on a panel interview the other day, or the other day. Anytime I say the other day, could be in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
But I was asked this question on a panel interview of health professionals, and they asked exactly the same. What do we do? And I said, well, first thing is we need to get the tools and the techniques into the hands of school teachers, parents, people who can make significant change in their children's lives to make sure that they're robust and resilient when they actually go out into the workforce, into real life. I think that's one part of it. I think the second part then is being curious and exploring. I think that one of the things that we really need to do in our health service, right across the board, mental health, physical health, every element of health, is to start to actually look at, okay, there's some people out there doing some really great things, whether it be a chiropractor or a physiotherapist, and kind of go, what do you do and how can we bring those tools into our mainstream service? So there's the preventative side, I guess, of how do we put the tools in the hands of the people who are raising these people, and it's specifically teachers and parents. But then on the other side of that is that when someone is unwell, what are the tools and techniques out there that are working? Whether it's someone's overweight or somebody's mentally unwell, like what are the tools and the techniques that are working so that we can bring them into our mainstream services, that when people walk through the door, instead of having to wait 3 months to see a professional and change medication, that we can actually sit down with them and actually care about somebody. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing. Lisa Rankin talks about this a lot in her book Mind Over Medicine. That in all of her research she did in the mental health space, why do complementary healthcare providers actually work, whether it's scientifically based or not? The one thing that you find is that you go to a doctor, you get a 7.5 minute appointment, maybe 15 minutes if you're really lucky. You go to a coach, you might sit down for 2 hours with that coach and have a really good in-depth conversation. So I think that's a big part of our system that we've really let slip, is the care element.
Yeah, actually I just finished a 5 day conference that's on every 4 years in America. I mean, unfortunately, I couldn't go to America and actually do it online, but it's all that whole 4 or 5 days is about introducing new therapies to the to practitioners. Like 20,000 people go. It's pretty amazing, and that was one of the big things that we talked about, like all the healthcare stuff that has to be addressed now. Post COVID and all the things that we've sort of let through the cracks. So I think it is slowly coming, but it is taking a long time. Now, this is a men's podcast predominantly. So, just in your view, what are some of the things that you feel men are misunderstood by, or what are some of the things that men are not allowing themselves to go through or change?
It's so fascinating, mate. It's probably one of the most difficult times to be alive right now, but also one of the most amazing. So we've got this really complex system process, like, and as humans, we've gone from being that very masculine and feminine type energies where we have the masculine that goes out and hunts, and the feminine that looks after the tribe and brings up the kids, and now with a lot of mums working, and dads, there's pressures on both sides to kind of, as a guy, where do you actually sit? I mean, am I allowed to say, gee, she's got a nice bum? Or am I like, what am I allowed to say? What am I not allowed to say? And, I guess it's that balance of trying to get the masculine energy right and being able to still be a man, which at the end of the day, like that's what we're born to be, a man. We're not born to be what society tells us to be. We're born to be ourselves. So I think that's one of the big challenges right now, is that for a young kid growing up, changing from boy to man, like what is a man supposed to do? And what they did 40 years ago, even 20 years ago, the parents that are bringing them up are bringing them up to a completely different world. So I think the big challenge I'm seeing from boys to men right now is that what is a man and how do you be one?
Yeah, yeah.
So
I mean, like that whole masculine energy is, I think 2020 for me was all about men, because like there was like an explosion in regards to men getting some, like, at least starting to talk.
yeah,
Like there's lots of rural, like, people going to talk to people in the country about suicide prevention and all that. And so yeah, it's exciting. It's an exciting time, but like you said, it's still we're in our infancy because no one really knows what they can say. I mean, like I hate all that political correctness stuff, because you can get in trouble for the most smallest thing now.
yeah.
In regard, as I said, we only focus mainly on men. So, what do you think a lot of men are assuming about themselves and about women? I know it's a big question, but like I think a lot of assumptions cause us to stay stuck. So, what are some of those assumptions that men are making?
You mean what assumptions are men making about women?
Well, that women are about other men, or even like, I'll give you an example. So, one assumption that I hear a lot of is, oh, it'll be right. I don't need to do therapy.
Yeah,
Right? So they assume that they're going to get through it. Or an assumption about women is that they're more emotional than men, which we know that, everyone has emotions. So I think some of those assumptions stop people, especially men, from moving forward, especially the toughness and the resilience that they think that they have, where they don't need to actually talk about it.
yeah. So I think that concept of masculine energy, which is, when I talk about that, one of the most masculine things that you can do, and this is for any guy listening right now, one of the most masculine things you can do is say, I need help.
Yeah.
Like, show me a more brave thing to say than a guy who goes to one of his mates and says, you know what, I'm having a really hard time right now and I need someone to talk to,
Mm.
or go to a therapist or go to a coach. And I think this is where coaching specifically is exploding, especially in that space of men's health. Because, if I'm a guy and I go and say, sit around at a party and, someone says, well, you seem a lot happier. I mean, it's unlikely someone's going, yeah, I've been and seen a psychologist or a counselor. But when it comes to life coaching, there's not the stigma of, I guess, the clinical side of life coaching. People kind of go, what is life coaching? What do they do? Well, I guess the difference between counselling services and psychology services, they're problem focused. We're goals focused. Where do you want to go, and how do we help you let go of some of that stuff?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. You talk about masculine energy, and I was asked this question once before, exactly the same question. But for me, masculine energy is really standing up and saying, I need help. That's the bravest thing you can do. It's braver than toughing it out. It's
Yeah.
braver than sitting there suffering in silence. It's one of the bravest things that you can do.
Yeah. It's like self-acceptance, isn't it? It's accepting. I think men have been taught not to accept the bad things.
Yeah.
Right? So they only look at the positive things. I'm strong. I'm this. I'm the person that provides. So what about like with women? What do they presume about women? Do you think that they're presuming that they can't be weak or cry or be emotional, or do you think that they presume that the women are, more emotional? What are some of the things that you may have heard about how they see women?
Yeah.
Because that has to change too, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. And, as little kids, we're told, boys are told don't cry, girls are given a hug when they cry. So, that dynamic needs to change at a child level. But I think the thing about a man, especially if you're a single guy and even as a married man, like being able to still be that having your own energy, and whether that's feminine energy or masculine energy. So when it comes to feminine and masculine energy, I mean, there needs to be a balance, right? So if a female can have lots of masculine energy and a guy can have lots of feminine energy, and that relationship will still work. I think it's about, from a man's point of view, being able to own that. I've sat down and talked with coaches who are masculine coaches, and they're trying to toughen up these guys that are really wear their hearts on their sleeve. I'm like, that's if that's not what that person wants, then that goes against everything that we teach at coaching. If that person if they're really okay in that feminine energy and that's really what works for them, then let them go find a partner who's got the masculine energy, whether it be male or female. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
This concept that males need to have the masculine energy is just,
Well, it's just a social context, isn't it?
yeah.
With like toys and with colors and all that stuff. What you're saying earlier, they were taught at a very young age, and then you join a sports team. It's just so inbuilt, especially in our culture. So it is tough for men to sort of break away from that. I mean, at Secret Men's Business, our main mantra is self-acceptance. So it's sort of going on what you said. So why do you think not a lot, but some guys reject any of that? Like what is it just that they're inbuilt programming?
Oh, look, everything comes down to our inbuilt programming, and there's two parts to our programming. There's the programming that's passed down through our DNA, our biological programming, which is, at the end of the day, men are men. They have a penis. They have anatomy for as a man, and there's things that certain parts of the role that come with that, and the same for females. And I think that being able to accept that you're a man, and that just because you're a man doesn't mean these things that are either being passed down through our genes or passed down through, I think, social pressures is actually conflicting quite a lot with what people naturally want to be. And I've got friends that are transgender, I've got friends that are gay, I've got friends that are heterosexual, and everything in between. And when you talk about self-acceptance, you nailed it, because it doesn't matter what you see yourself as a person. If you can be happy with that,
Yeah. Well,
and
what you're saying is that which I love, is that, I love the way you talk, by the way. I love the things that you use, how you explain things. You're making people aware that you have to take responsibility. So if you want to have a good life, it's not about the gay guy or the trans person or feminine or masculine. It's all about how you see you. When you accept yourself, there's no problem, because it doesn't matter, does it?
no. And
Yeah.
there's only two things you've really got any control over: is your environment or your mindset. And everything else is irrelevant. If you're not happy, you either need to change your environment or you need to change your mindset.
Yeah.
And I think that so much society programming, and again, our brains are not designed for the kind of programming that we have. Our brains are designed to be in a tribe, living in a small, 200 sort of maximum is generally, most of the world researchers, the tribes are sort of 200, maybe a maximum of 1,000 in some of the big tribes, but most of the time it's 200 tribe, people are 200, and there's no TVs, there's no internet, there's no Foxtel, there's no Netflix, there's no, like, we are literally so over programmed. And I think learning the tools and techniques, for me, that was one of the things I loved about being able to help, first of all, mum, but especially now everybody, is how do you shed away the stuff that's not important? Because that programming, that you see a photo on Facebook of a guy with his shirt off and he's ripped and he looks great and he looks really fit, and you think, man, I'm never going to get to that. I've never looked like that. Of course, that guy's lucky, and that just sets people up to fail. So I think that there's a huge amount to be said for self-acceptance and being able to say, well, this is who I am and I'm going to own it. And if I want to improve my life, I need to either change my mindset and accept my life conditions for what they are and say, I'm really happy, or I need to change my actual environment.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're sort of talking as if you just did you just decide to do that because of your mum and it just evolved for you, right? And so some people make a decision. For me personally, I went through all that stuff when I sort of had a medical problem. And so that medical problem was like my wake up, right? So, do you think that most people have to have a wake up, or are we at a point now where we should be investing in just doing it ourselves?
Yeah, I think that my job as a coach, and when we teach coaches, we say your job as a coach is to bring that what the person wants and what's actually happening in their life to a point of where they can actually say, you know what, enough's enough, without that big shake up. I mean, some people it happens to, and as you said yourself, Joey, like you got to that point by when it happened
I
to
was sort
you.
of I was sort of forced here. Like I couldn't walk, so that couldn't walking thing made me face myself, and I had to find acceptance in the fact that I was in a wheelchair. And then from there, everything just became easier. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? But I know what you're saying. But what about the guys that don't get to the coach? How do we get them to get to the coach?
yeah, it's finding a person who they can actually sit down and have a chat with. And I think that it doesn't matter whether it's a coach. I think one of the best things that I heard was that, as guys, what we need to do is find one of our mates and turn them into a friend.
Yeah.
As guys, quite often a lot of guys have heaps of mates, but they don't have someone they can actually go and have a conversation with. And it's really hard if you're in a relationship and a committed relationship you've been in for a long time. To go and talk to your wife and to try and have these conversations, it's not she's not the right person, and or a husband if you're a guy who's that who's
Mm.
married to a man, like it's not the right person to talk to as a partner, and that because that person's in your life all the time, and that can have a it's like kind of like going talking to your boss about how you're struggling, and then you're thinking, well, I might get sacked tomorrow. Like
Yeah.
there's that fear, right? So there needs to be that person who's a mate that you can turn into a friend. And I think if you can do that and actually have those deep conversations, and I get it that there's a lot of guys have a lot of mates and a lot of associates, but it's not the done thing to go and talk to your mates about that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not about telling everyone how bad your life is, but it's having that I think that one person in your life, whether it's
Yeah.
a coach, therapist, a social worker, or an actual friend of yours. I think it's just turning that one person that you can turn to when things
Mm.
aren't going well and just be open.
Yeah, and also that party analogy that you used, I think, is what needs to change. Like I was a bit of a freak. I think as soon as I went through all that change, I would go to parties until I'd want to tell everyone what I was doing. Right, so I think that needs to change. People need to be like a bit American. Americans don't really care about the word therapy, do they? Like, but here it's still a bit taboo. Once we start opening it up and just making it normal, I think we'll start to see big changes. If you were able to give one message to all the men listeners, or all the listeners, I guess I better not be exclude women, but like, what would be your message in regards to how they can go into 2021?
I think it comes back to that what we talked about a little bit earlier. I think it's that know what you want is the most important thing. Most people know what they don't want. If I sit down with 99% of men and I say to them, "What do you want?" They'll give me a list of all the things I don't want. So, what
Yeah.
do you want in life? And I go, "Well, I don't want to be unhappy. I don't want my shitty relationship. I don't. Sorry, I can't swear probably.
No, you
Um,
can, you can. This
yeah,
is
so I don't want good. I don't want my shitty relationship. I don't want my kids to misbehave. Like, and you say, great. So what do you want? They go, "Yeah, well, none of those things." It's like actually getting down to what you want in life is a challenge for a lot of people because they don't think about that. Now, Joey, if you're going on holiday, right, and I say to you, we're going to, I don't know, let's say we're going to America in, I don't know, 2025, whenever it opens up. But, you say, right, I'm going to America. Well, the second you make that decision, your brain then starts to try and find ways to get you there. Plane flights, accommodation, how are we going to get there? What are we going to do when we get there? And that's the way that our brain works. So if you don't have something, you don't have a destination to focus on, your brain's going to focus on all the things around you that are fearful because that's the way our brain's programmed. It's programmed to keep you safe. And the second that you don't have a goal or something that you're focused on, something that you live for, that your purpose is driven by, your brain goes to, okay, what's in my environment right now that's not safe? And then, of course, it brings up all your stuff. People, I don't have enough money to pay my bills. And, oh, yeah, I talked to my wife tonight. Oh, God, that's not going too well. And my boss is not too happy with me. And all this stuff starts to come up and then tell us what bad people we are. And then who do you talk to about it? So it's this vicious cycle. So if there's one piece of advice, I would say to people, find out what you want in life because the second you make that decision, your brain will start finding the opportunities to get you there.
Yeah, I find it like fascinating how people can really obsess with, say, work or with buying their house or with all those sort of external things, but they don't obsess with having clear mental health. Like, I always find that interesting that when you look at all the things that they're doing, their mental state could be at the bottom somewhere. Like, they don't really self-care, or they don't care about themselves. So I think, is that another thing that men need to sort of start prioritizing, that it is important for them to think about their mental state?
Yeah, I think that one of the big challenges with men is that if you, as I said, if you have a work goal, people can become obsessive about the work goal, but it's more about what you want as a person. I mean, it's great to get a promotion, but for what purpose?
Mm.
You know, and it's great to have lots of money, but for what purpose? And probably like you, I know lots of people that have got lots of money that are really unhappy. I know lots of people that have got no money that are really happy. So money does not equal happiness, but what it does give you is opportunities. And again, it's one of those things. If people know what they want, and then what again, from a coaching point of view, that's, once I start and I say, what do you want? The next bit then is working on the mental health stuff, and not only mental health, but also your mindset. If what mindset do you need to get there? So if somebody says to me, I want to be a business owner, and I want to open a business, and I want to do whatever, then the first thing I say to them is, what's going to stop you from that? And that's all the stuff that we work on. Like, if you think of a coach being, we're going on a road trip, my job's to figure out the destination and to remove all the roadblocks along the way to make it the easiest trip you can possibly get. And that's what a coach does.
Yeah. So for all the listeners out there, if you're interested in Justin's coaching business and want to know more, there's going to be all the information linked to the bottom of this podcast. I mean, I found Justin on Facebook. I read his story and I got really curious and I reached out. So I need to ask you, mate, about your TV experience or your
Yeah.
TV profile. So many listeners may not realize that you're on telly. So do you want to tell us a little bit about, just to wrap up, like the story of how did Justin get on television?
Yeah, so I read a Richard Branson book many years ago. It was one of the first books I read. Again, I coming out the back of mum's mental health, and again trying to go from being, I was a man at 12. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I took on with mum's mental illness was, I was, and I wouldn't say a man, but I was doing, adult activities, getting,
Responsibilities would be.
yeah, yeah, 100%. So when I actually got to the point where dad was so tied up with trying to look after mum, when I got to the point where I was like, I'm 18 now and I've got a job, and how do I be a man? I had no idea. So I started reading a book, and one of the books I read was Richard Branson's book, autobiography. And when I read that, one of the things he said in there is, if you get a great opportunity, just say yes and figure out how to do it later. So at the time when I started this particular business, I had about, I think about $3,000 in the bank, and I had a mortgage repayment coming out. My wife was not working many hours at her job, and two kids. So I had to make it work. So I went to every single person I knew and I said, look, if you hear of any work going in the consultancy, coaching space, anything where I can help somebody, please let me know. I need work. And a lady said, oh, would you be interested in doing TV stuff? And at the time I was like, yep, sure. And so it got sent in to meet with the producer of the show, James, who's now a really good friend of mine. And sat down with James, and James said, all right, throw me a couple of lines. We did a couple of lines, and he said, great, I'll send you a contract. And I thought he was just being a really nice guy and trying to get rid of me, because he sent me out the door within about 5 minutes of getting there. I got a contract through, signed it, and yeah, that rest is history. So I'm 9 seasons now into 3 different TV shows.
Yeah. So
As a TV presenter.
so what have you done? Like, is it based on what you were doing for work, or is it totally separate?
Totally separate, yeah. So the first one that I presented on was the New Homes Guide TV on Channel 9. So it was a show about houses, and the second one was Fresh TV, which is a Channel 7 lifestyle show, and the latest one's WA Caravan Camping.
Oh
So
my
we're
God,
into our
you're
fourth
so
season.
lucky. Is it like, was it like, with no experience? How did you like shit your pants? Like, how did you go
Uh,
into that environment with just a 5 minute audition?
Yeah, I have no idea, Joe. But I think what happened was, it was one of those things. I needed the money, and he said, "Tell me a number," and I gave him a ridiculous number, and it came down to about half of that by the time we finished negotiating. But yeah, look, it was fun. I enjoyed it, and for me, as someone who teaches people in public speaking, I guess I was not formally trained in any sort of TV presenting or journalism or anything like that. So I think the thing that sort of got me by is my ability just to do this sort of stuff, have a conversation, have fun, make light of things,
Yeah,
and
but it also sounds like you're the type of guy that just goes for the yes, like Branson was saying to you, Roz, right? So, do you see yourself utilizing this in the future for yourself? Like, do you see yourself maybe creating your own show, or is it something that you want to pursue down the track, like bring in mental health and TV?
mate, it's a really great question, because James, who's the producer of the TV shows, he said to me one day, look, what about we look at creating a TV show around mental health? And I said, look, I'm all in. I think that would be amazing.
I agree. I
That
think
was
that
as
would be.
far
I
as
think that would be the. I think that would be the best show. Like,
oh,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, and as far as the conversation, that was as far as the conversation went. But like for example, we had a course just run last week. We had a lady that come in, ADHD, diagnosed as a young child. She had restless leg syndrome, legs constantly moving. We did one technique, took about 15 minutes, and the leg, like literally in front of the whole room, just stopped shaking.
Mm,
And she'd had that since she was about 15. So, the leg shaking stopped, and everyone was like, that was weird. And 4 days later, still hadn't come back. And I
yeah.
think that, so much is
So
that
much.
energy that's
Yeah.
buzzing in our head. And so for me, that sort of stuff would make great TV. But I just,
I agree because like it's only about 17 to 18% of our population utilizes mental health services, right? That means that there's like over 80% of our population that doesn't know or doesn't have access. So I think the best way to get to them sometimes is TV.
yeah. And the challenging thing for me, Joey, and this is always going to be the challenge, is that how do you link up the right person with the right helper, and especially in that men's space? Like, how do you find guys do have this really, reservation, I guess. And this is the one thing that I've found a lot with guys. They have a reservation around therapy already, or around, any kind of therapy. So they'll go and see maybe a therapist if they do reach out to one. And generally, if they don't have a good experience the first time round, they'll bail and they'll never go
Yeah.
back.
Well, that's
So
that's the reason why that's why this podcast is important. That's why you're on it, because you represent one of 100 therapists that have been on the show. So people get to see the different varieties, because I think the more exposure they have, the more that they know. Like, there's probably a lot of people listening right now that don't even know that there is such thing as a coaching school. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So all these things I think it needs to start with just keep continually introducing people. And even though some people don't care, I think they're like little seeds, aren't they? Oh, like, I remember that coach, da da da. Because I mean, that the reason why I'm a therapist is because when I had my emotional breakdown, my therapist asked me, "What do you want to be?" And I just said, "I want to be you." And then she took me under her wings and became my mentor. So, it's just about the more access we have where people see that men are doing different things. Like, you are a coach, and they go, "Oh, I'm a therapist." Oh, that's when they're going to get. I think it's going to become easier. Do you agree?
yeah, and it's that matchmaking service, right? So I think that the more variety there is out there for people to access, and the more that they can go and try. I think that probably in our mental health service, up until 2020 has been a big change, I think, in our mental health service. But before that, certainly last year and before, all therapists just got branded as a therapist, so that they assumed that most people had this internal representation, that the person was going to be sitting across from them in an office and talking to them about their problems and all that sort of stuff. Whereas now I think we're starting to see that there's lots of people out there doing lots of stuff, whether it's energy healing, whether it's Reiki, whether it's traditional therapy, psychotherapy. It doesn't matter. It's just trying to find that thing that works for you. Not
Yeah.
everyone that comes in to see me walks away with the result they want. Sometimes I refer them out to other therapists, and that's really what I think. When we can get super good at going, you know what, I can see I'm not getting a result for you. Let me find someone who might be able to help. Then our mental health services, that's when it will really improve.
Yeah. Oh my God, I could talk to you for hours. Justin, thank you so much for. I mean, I think I want to have you back on the show because I don't feel like I'm ready to let you go. But thank you so much for all your information. And like I said, all your information will be down below. So if you are interested in anything that Justin was saying, please click the link and get in contact with him. So thanks, mate. Thank you so much.
Mate, not a problem at all. Absolute pleasure to be here.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Secret Men's Business podcast. Don't be shy to click on the little button below to hit subscribe. And don't forget, our podcasts are at 9 o'clock on Mondays and Thursdays. Till next time, guys, have a good one. Bye.